Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission is to take a dense stack of sources, dissect the core arguments, extract the crucial details, and give you the knowledge you need to be thoroughly informed. Today, we are investigating something. Well, something genuinely unprecedented. It's a corporate anomaly. We're not talking about a collapse marked by scandal or failure or debt. We're talking about a sudden, near-perfect vanishing act. We'll be analyzing the documents and research surrounding a major multinational corporation from the late 1990s that, despite all evidence of financial health, simply ceased to exist overnight.
And this is a deep dive that really requires us to adopt a particular tone. Think of this as a serious, slow-paced documentary. We have to focus relentlessly on the timeline, on the gaps in information, and, the very deliberate nature of the unanswered questions. The sources we've been given detail an event that just completely defies the standard models of corporate failure. We're looking at the total, silent, and almost unnervingly efficient evaporation of a profitable entity.
That distinction right there, profitable and erased, that's what makes this story so compelling, isn't it?
It's the core of it.
The central mystery we have to tackle is this. How does a company, a financially stable, fully operational company holding valuable long-term contracts, a company employing over 4,000 people across 2 continents, how does it manage to simply delete itself from existence in a single night? And perhaps the most unsettling part, which the sources confirm, is that there was absolutely no traditional paper trail. No bankruptcy filing in any jurisdiction, no public explanation from anyone in leadership. It's the complete antithesis of a modern corporate failure, which are almost universally messy and loud.
They are. Historically, companies fail loudly. They're defined by their dissolution. You get press conferences, shareholder panic, months and months of legal proceedings, debt collection notices, and you get mountains of audited paperwork documenting every single step of their demise. They fail messily. This corporation, however, it disappeared perfectly, silently, and with an administrative efficiency that suggests a planned high-resource operation, not some kind of economic necessity. The sheer deliberate quality of the erasure is what elevates this from a business curiosity to a profound mystery. Okay, so let's unpack this. We should start by establishing the identity of this invisible giant.
To understand the scope of this disappearance, we really have to recognize that the entity in question was massive. This was not a small-time operation.
Not at all.
At its peak, the company employed over 4,000 personnel, and this wasn't just a regional workforce either. The company maintains substantial, fully operational offices in 3 distinct countries. We're talking significant hubs in both Europe and North America. That scale alone implies a really complex, integrated administrative structure, something capable of handling global logistics, payroll, everything.
Yes, we're talking about an established, multinational entity. It commanded substantial physical infrastructure, and it managed a dispersed, highly technical workforce. Yet, the reason this whole event could happen, the reason the disappearance went largely unnoticed outside of its immediate industry, that comes down entirely to its specific operational profile in the 1990s economy.
How so?
Well, the sources indicate the company was deeply embedded in a sector that few consumers, and honestly, even few general business reporters, ever paid any attention to. It was not a famous brand. It didn't sell consumer goods. It had zero public visibility.
And that invisibility is the central paradox here. The core function of this company was critical, you could even argue vital, but it operated entirely in the background. It specialized in supporting internal systems, complex logistics platforms, and the underlying digital infrastructure used by a much larger, often consumer-facing or government-regulated corporations.
It's a great way to put it.
You could think of them as the architects and maintainers of the specialized digital plumbing, or maybe the central nervous system that kept the true industrial giants running smoothly.
And that background role provided a very unique economic model that made the company highly profitable because their services were, well, they were non-negotiable necessities for their clients. You can't run a global supply chain or a national energy grid without reliable internal systems.
Of course.
And more importantly for our story, this role ensured it remained largely invisible outside of its specific, specialized B2B industry niche. Its revenue streams were steady, long-term, insulated from public market volatility. They were derived from these crucial embedded support contracts that would just never generate a headline.
So the lack of public fame meant that when the lights suddenly went out.
Exactly. The general public, the business press, even non-specialized institutional investors, they simply had no established channel or any reason to pay attention.
This inherent invisibility then gave the operators of the company the perfect strategic advantage for the ultimate disappearing act.
It created the perfect conditions.
But let's press on the details of its health. We really need to nail down the financial state immediately preceding this incident. When we talk about sudden closures, we look for the red flags.
A CEO pleading for a government loan, panic stock selling, missed payrolls.
Right. The sources paint the complete opposite picture here.
They do. The sources emphasize complete financial stability right up to the vanishing point. We have key data points that absolutely contradict the narrative of a standard economic failure. This company was operating based on long-term contracts, some of them reportedly multi-year, which guaranteed stable, predictable revenue streams.
And internally?
Furthermore, there were no internal signs of distress. Employees were paid promptly, including, in some cases, substantial bonuses. Major suppliers continued to deliver goods and services as normal, right up to the day before the closure.
And from an external perspective, there was just no alarm. The sources confirm investors were not panicking. There were no public headlines warning of an imminent collapse. No emergency board meetings were called to address liquidity issues.
In fact, many were preparing for expansion.
Expansion into new regional markets.
Yes. This is where we shift from a story about failure to a story about deliberate termination. The financial stability and the operational normalcy make the swift, silent collapse utterly inexplicable. That is, if we try to apply standard business practices,
it just doesn't compute.
A rational business, even if it's being acquired, is either sold intact for maximum profit or it files for bankruptcy when it runs out of cash. You do not execute an instantaneous, total, and expensive shutdown when your cash flow is stable and you have contracts guaranteeing future revenue.
So here's where it gets really interesting. The fact that the company was stopped rather than simply failing suggests the decision wasn't driven by economic desperation. It suggests an immediate, coordinated, and resource-intensive mandate coming from the very top, or maybe from an external force that acquired the right to issue that command.
That's a critical distinction.
But if the company was so incredibly stable and profitable, why would the highest levels of management agree to execute what is essentially a self-destruct sequence, one that would inevitably invite scrutiny even if it was delayed?
And that question, the motive behind halting a successful operation, is the central, enduring enigma of this deep dive. It implies a priority higher than quarterly profits or shareholder value. It suggests a coordinated effort to control information and asset transfer, treating the legal entity itself as disposable once its core value.
The contracts and the key personnel.
Exactly, once that was extracted.
To truly appreciate the surgical nature of this event, we have to look closely at the precise timeline the sources provide. Thousands of employees across multiple international offices went to work as usual on that final day, a Monday maybe, or whatever day it was that preceded the incident. The buildings were routine, desks were cluttered, the company logo was still proudly mounted on the facades. There was absolutely nothing that hinted at the massive structural change that was already in motion.
And that last day of normalcy is such a vital baseline. We have to imagine the sheer scale of coordination required to dismantle a multinational corporation without a single employee, manager, or supplier noticing anything unusual.
It's staggering.
This was not a slow winding down of operations. It was a scheduled, instantaneous cutoff point activated overnight.
Then the hammer fell, Tuesday morning. Employees arrive at their usual offices across Europe and North America to find a complete disruption.
Not just a disruption, a wall.
They weren't met by colleagues or even liquidators. They were met by external security personnel. And these staff were under strict instruction to deny entry to everyone.
Everyone, including long-term employees, mid-level managers, and crucially, senior executive staff.
That part is just bizarre. The senior staff are locked out too.
And the employee accounts regarding the security staff. That's a critical detail. They were uniformly described as being confused themselves.
So they weren't aggressive?
No, not aggressive, not confrontational, not acting like they were part of a hostile takeover or a corporate raid. They were just following a paid directive. Prevent access, full stop. This small detail reinforces the idea that the operation was managed by a central, external administrative core that hired third-party contractors to execute a single, precise, and non-negotiable order.
But if they were denied entry, what exactly happened inside those offices overnight? The sources, based on inference and the few people who later gained access, often weeks or months later, describe a scene that just challenges all conventional wisdom about a corporate closure.
Yes. We have to call this the clean sweep.
The clean sweep.
When a company fails suddenly, it leaves behind chaos. You find abandoned property, half-packed boxes, often damage inflicted in haste. The documentation suggests the complete opposite here.
Desks were cleared of all corporate assets. Servers, the digital heart of the company, were physically removed, not just wiped. And perhaps most comprehensively, all paper files and archives were missing.
Gone.
I think we need to spend a moment on the sheer logistics of that server removal. For a company supporting critical infrastructure for global giants, I mean, we are not talking about a couple of rack-mounted servers in a closet.
No, absolutely not. This would have been entire data centers, potentially containing proprietary client systems and petabytes of sensitive information.
And removing this equipment so meticulously, so efficiently, and without drawing any attention, that implies dozens of highly specialized personnel working under absolute secrecy for hours.
And for a coordinated, multi-location international operation, it's an incredible feat.
It is.
But the most critical, most unsettling detail is the missing personal items. Former employees reported that no personal belongings were left behind.
Wait, none at all?
We're talking about items like family photos, personal jackets, small desk artifacts, even half-used coffee mugs.
That's chilling.
It implies one of two possibilities, and both demand incredible operational precision, either under some pre-planned, mundane pretext, like an inventory audit or office cleaning. Employees were directed to clear their desks completely on the final day.
Which seems unlikely that nobody would talk about it.
Or the cleanup crew itself was so meticulous that they removed every single trace of human occupation that wasn't structural.
That level of pre-planning, down to removing a personal jacket, makes this move look less like a sudden failure and more like a planned professional exfiltration. No damage was reported. The buildings were simply empty shells, perfectly clean and locked up. It was as if the company had opened a back door, loaded its essential assets, its intellectual property, its client data, its financial records, and then just quietly ceased to exist, leaving no physical detritus behind that could later be seized by creditors or investigated by authorities.
And this rapid physical erasure was confirmed later that day. With the issuance of the single final communication to the now locked-out employees, a short internal email was circulated.
The full text of the message, chilling in its brevity and absolute finality, contained only 7 words.
Just 7.
The company has ceased all operations effective immediately.
And the lack of supporting detail in this decree is a defining feature of the mystery. No signature, no contact information for HR, no legal direction, zero follow-up mechanism. For thousands of people who had just lost their entire livelihood and corporate identity, this one sentence was the official and only explanation. It served as a unilateral declaration of non-existence, delivered with a cold, administrative precision that speaks volumes about the entity orchestrating the shutdown.
It was designed to inform, but explicitly not to communicate or negotiate.
Precisely.
We now move into what feels like the territory of legal impossibility. When a massive multinational company fails, the sheer weight of its legal structure ensures a massive paper trail.
It has to.
The whole purpose of corporate law, particularly around insolvency, is to protect creditors, manage asset transfer, and ensure former employees can claim what they're due. This company appears to have deliberately and successfully circumvented every single one of those foundational legal requirements.
This is where the story shifts from being about unusual operational efficiency to a profound legal anomaly. The fundamental legal obligation of any company facing closure, especially one spanning multiple countries with diverse legal systems, like the UK, Germany, and the US, for instance, is to file for insolvency or bankruptcy.
And why is that so critical?
It's necessary to create a legal shield, to protect any remaining assets, and to manage the debt settlement process under court supervision. It creates an official, documented end.
But the sources confirm 3 specific astonishing absences. Specific absence 1, there was no insolvency filing in any of the countries where it maintained major operations.
And
Specific absence 2, no court documents related to formal liquidation or dissolution were found in any relevant registry. And specific absence 3, no official liquidator or receiver was appointed by any court to manage the entity's remaining assets or debts.
it's as if the legal entity itself decided it would just skip the documented, mandatory, and often painful process of death.
The logistical difficulty of creating this legal vacuum cannot be overstated, can it? Especially across multiple jurisdictions?
No, it really can't. Each country has distinct compulsory administrative requirements for corporate termination. To avoid filing in even one requires meticulous planning. But to avoid it across 3 international legal systems implies either high-level legal collusion or an unprecedented synchronized withdrawal of corporate presence.
And the Vanishing Act extended beyond the primary entity. Months after the main operation ceased, the sources indicate that several subsidiary companies, the administrative arms in various jurisdictions, simply vanished from business registries. They weren't marked as officially dissolved, nor were they registered as being acquired or merged. They were just administratively gone, deleted from the public record.
And that's described as a highly irregular administrative outcome. Business registries are not transient databases. They're maintained by governmental or quasi-governmental bodies precisely for the purpose of maintaining a public record of liability and ownership.
So for a legal entity to simply be deleted from a registry,
it suggests a monumental administrative maneuver. Deletion, as opposed to dissolution, which leaves the paper trail, requires an extremely specialized process. It often involves explicit authority or the exploitation of jurisdictional loopholes in the 1990s record-keeping systems.
Walk us through the administrative impossibility of that, especially back in the late 1990s. We weren't dealing with instant digital records and highly integrated global databases yet.
Well, the 90s context is absolutely crucial here. Corporate registries were often less interconnected, more reliant on localized physical documentation. A major global firm would have legal counsel dedicated to finding and exploiting the administrative seams between those systems.
So they found a loophole.
They found or created one. For a subsidiary to vanish, it means that either the relevant governmental bodies were convinced the entity was never legally active or operational in that country, which is clearly false given the payroll records, or, and this is more worrying, that a high-level administrative functionary processed a specific request for removal rather than the standard death certificate of a dissolution notice.
Which suggests
what? It suggests sophisticated regulatory arbitrage executed by very experienced international lawyers.
And the immediate brutal human consequence of this legal vacuum was the impasse faced by the thousands of former employees. They attempted to claim unpaid wages, legally mandated redundancy pay, and the official termination letters they needed for unemployment filings.
The result was the creation of a legal ghost. Their lawyers, when they tried to initiate standard legal action, found there was no one to sue.
There was no company.
There was no registered agent for service, no liquidator appointed by the court, and no physical office to address the claims to. The corporation, in a legal sense, had ceased to possess corporate personhood, yet its debts and obligations remained outstanding.
The sources described the frustration as absolute. They were chasing a shadow that was financially tangible one day and legally vaporous the next.
It's a complete legal dead end.
This raises an important and deeply troubling question for corporate governance, doesn't it? How could a company employing 4,000 people and managing millions of pounds in complex international contracts legally erase itself so thoroughly across multiple jurisdictions that it couldn't be held accountable for basic employee rights?
The coordination required to achieve that level of legal scrubbing implies vast resources and incredible foresight.
Furthermore, the erasure efforts weren't just physical and legal, they extended into the digital sphere. The company's main website went offline within weeks, which is common enough.
Sure.
However, the subsequent action was far from common. Former employees and researchers noted that archived copies of the website, pages captured by early internet library services and caches, also began disappearing shortly thereafter.
And that is a deliberate, active effort to erase its digital footprint and its historical record.
Right. In the late 1990s, the resources required to actively request the deletion of historical web archives were not trivial. It indicates the goal was not just to close the business,
but to eliminate its existence from the shared public memory.
Exactly. And this pattern of coordinated silence is mirrored in the leadership. The sources confirm to this day an absolute, sustained silence from every single former executive.
Not one.
Not a single interview has emerged, no public statement of regret, no tell-all book, and crucially, in this age of corporate dissent, not one single leaked document or internal memo has materialized detailing the decision-making process.
And that collective silence is arguably the most powerful piece of non-evidence we have. Executive silence in a major corporate event, whether it's a failure or an acquisition, is usually unsustainable. It breaks down due to ego, fear of litigation, or legal compulsion.
But not here.
The total, coordinated, and ongoing silence strongly suggests that the disappearance was managed by entities operating under constraints far tighter than standard employment contracts or corporate non-disclosure agreements. It points to either extreme internal discipline or some mechanism of control that transcends standard corporate liability.
It becomes evident that trying to trace this disappearance to figure out if it was a collapse, an acquisition, or an erasure is futile when every physical location has been scrubbed, every legal entity vaporized, and every digital and human footprint has been perfectly silenced.
Yes.
The expense, the coordination, the administrative effort expended in the erasure process seem to have rivaled or maybe even exceeded the resources required to run the profitable company itself.
Let's turn to the immediate visceral consequences for the workforce. We are discussing 4,000 human lives, careers, and financial security systems that were terminated instantaneously. These employees were left completely stranded, receiving no redundancy pay, no official termination letters, which created a bureaucratic nightmare for filing basic unemployment benefits, and, most painfully, absolutely no official answer for why their jobs just vanished overnight.
Their uncertainty created this enormous bureaucratic limbo. Without an official liquidation proceeding or a formal termination notice, they couldn't prove their previous employment status to new employers or to government agencies. This ambiguity, the sources suggest, kept some employees tied up in legal and administrative battles for years afterward. They were unable to definitively prove the corporate entity that employed them was legally dead.
However, the sources do note an interesting and contradictory pattern in the fate of these employees. While thousands were left struggling, a small but significant cohort of highly specialized technical personnel, they were rehired by other firms months later.
Okay, and what were these other firms?
Crucially, the sources emphasize that these new firms were conducting remarkably similar work, often servicing the same underlying infrastructure systems that the Vanish company used to manage. Others, unable to recover from the shock or the ambiguity, left that highly specialized industry entirely.
The immediate re-entry pattern for the specialized workforce strongly suggests that the underlying business, the contracts, the vital maintenance, the intellectual property, and the required human capital, it didn't vanish.
Oh, it was transferred.
It was successfully transferred. If employees are rehired by a competitor to do the exact same job on the exact same infrastructure systems, it implies the company's assets and client workload were successfully transitioned rather than suffering a true catastrophic collapse.
Precisely. The company, the legal entity, was killed. The business, the economic function, was moved.
Okay, so because official verifiable information is non-existent, we are left only with theories. These were developed by researchers, former industry analysts, and the legal teams who tried to pursue the company.
And we must stress this. We are reporting on the prevailing ideas that seek to explain this perfect operational crime, not endorsing speculation.
The primary explanation that attempts to account for the financial stability of the company is what we're calling Theory 1. Quiet absorption. This belief posits that the company was absorbed into a much larger, perhaps a competitor corporation. This theory argues that the acquiring entity orchestrated the transfer of all critical assets, personnel lists, and crucial contracts through highly complex behind closed doors asset purchase agreements.
And the key motive in this theory is evasion. A standard public merger or acquisition involves extensive public filing, shareholder disclosure, regulatory review across multiple jurisdictions.
And public restructuring.
Which often leads to client instability and market volatility. By simply dissolving the target company overnight and executing a private comprehensive asset purchase agreement, the acquiring firm could bypass all that regulatory noise. It could integrate the company's crucial infrastructure systems without alarming the market or their competitors.
But the sources must address the cost of this maneuver. To dissolve an entity with 4,000 employees and evade all liability, that would be incredibly expensive.
Astronomical.
The cost of legally erasing yourself and buying the silence of every executive might rival the cost of a standard public acquisition. This suggests the assets being acquired, the specialized infrastructure contracts, were exceptionally valuable or time-sensitive.
And that leads us directly to the second major theory, Theory 2, government intervention.
Now, this doesn't necessarily involve a broad conspiracy.
No, not at all. But rather it suspects involvement due to the critical nature of the company's embedded systems. You have to recall that their work supported logistics, internal systems, and often the digital backbone of critical national and international infrastructure.
So if the systems they managed were essential to, for example, national financial clearinghouses or power grid stability or key defense logistics,
Systems that are intensely regulated and often considered matters of national security.
any instability or public failure could lead to profound market panic or worse, critical service failure.
Exactly. The theory posits that the government, or a government-mandated regulatory body, recognized a sudden systemic threat within the company, perhaps a vulnerability in the systems it managed, or a politically inconvenient ownership structure. A forced, immediate, and utterly secretive shutdown, managed with military-like precision, would be the most effective way to transfer the critical functions to a more stable, trusted entity while maintaining absolute system stability and avoiding public fear.
What's fascinating here is that the motivation for absolute public silence remains identical in both of these theories, whether it's quiet absorption or a governmental mandate.
It's the same logic.
Publicly shutting the company down via insolvency or an official acquisition would have inevitably raised uncomfortable questions regarding the stability, security, and ownership of those critical infrastructure systems.
The silence, therefore, was not a side effect of corporate failure. It was the chosen, deliberate, and expensive mechanism used to ensure the efficient, quiet, and rapid transition of essential services while preserving market confidence.
The precision of the disappearance, the perfectly cleared offices, the immediate server removal, the coordinated executive silence, and the legal deletion, it lends substantial credence to the idea that this was a carefully managed operation.
It was. It was executed with a level of control and secrecy that implies resources far beyond a failing corporate structure. They had the means, the coordination, and the motive to effectively delete themselves from the public, legal, and digital record in a manner that is unprecedented for a firm of this size.
So, to review the core facts, we've analyzed the sources detailing a company that was, by all accounts, financially solvent. It employed 4,000 highly specialized people across multiple countries and moved millions in revenue. Yet it was systematically erased from existence in the late 1990s without leaving a single verifiable public record, a satisfactory explanation, or a legal entity for its former employees to pursue.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this case fundamentally challenges the assumption that large-scale corporate failure or restructuring must adhere to established, documented, and legally mandated procedures visible to the courts, creditors, and the public. This entity, despite its size and multinational obligations, demonstrated the capacity to make itself officially barely existent, dissolving its own personhood at will.
This event represents a really troubling model of corporate autonomy, doesn't it? The ability, apparently, to liquidate all liabilities and obligations simply by disappearing the legal entity altogether, avoiding all associated responsibilities and public oversight.
And this leaves us with our final unresolved questions. Questions that build on the source material but have no definitive answers, for you to mull or explore on your own. If the company was acquired via quiet absorption, what specific legal loophole in 1990s international law allowed the acquiring entity to erase the original firm so thoroughly, preventing 4,000 former employees from claiming their due severance?
And considering the precise nature of the clean sweep and the executive silence, what specific nature of its work in critical infrastructure was so politically or economically sensitive that it necessitated an absolute secretive shutdown, managed with a level of precision usually reserved for state operations?
And perhaps most fundamentally, given the demonstrated administrative and legal resources required for such a maneuver, how many other companies operating quietly today in the background of essential infrastructure might possess the established means, the resources, and the legal leverage to disappear with such perfection should their continued public existence suddenly become administratively inconvenient?
So what does this all mean? Whether it collapsed internally, was absorbed by a larger private entity, or was deliberately erased under governmental pressure, the truth remains buried beneath a dense layer of corporate and legal silence. Some companies fail loudly. Others, it seems, manage to disappear so quietly you only realize they're gone when the paper trail is already decades cold.